We're discussing, your top five stories of 2023. But before getting into some of those stories, I wonder just what the year has been like in the media for you in a nutshell. If you have any thoughts on, yeah, for me as a journalist, it feels like the year has like gone by in a second. I know people always say that, but for whatever reason, this year has felt like it's just flown by. I wonder if you have any thoughts on just the year as a whole.
Yeah, I mean, I think generally the pace of news feels to me like it's accelerated,
Mhm.
and the pace of like very serious news stories. So not just, I don't know, things that are, important in the moment, but not that consequential. It feels like we're at a kind of a a moment where so many things are intersecting that are so big, right? Geopolitical stuff between China and Russia and the U.S. There's and Iran, and there's of course the war right now, Israel's war on Hamas and Gaza, climate change, the rise of AI. It's like a whole bunch of things that, particularly those last two, that the outcome of which is right now deeply uncertain. And we've just come through COVID. I mean, let's face it, the pandemic, you know, changed all of us and was a huge disruptor of everything across the world. So yeah, I agree with you. It's been a big year.
I feel like you're a journalist that's very in touch with the audience that she's speaking to, and going through just the whirlwind of some of those stories you just mentioned. How, as a viewer or as a member of the public, how do you even sort through all of that that's going on at once? It's overwhelming, I think, for the public to have all these stories coming at them. I wonder if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I hear from people that sometimes they say I can't watch the news because it's too much.
Yeah.
And I understand that feeling because every day we look at our lineup. It used to be there were some days when we thought, well, we have a little extra time in the news today because there isn't that, there aren't that many national and international stories to sort of cover. That is never the case anymore. Now it is a constant game of Jenga. Like, what can we take out? Well, if we leave this part out, is how important is that? If we take that out, then are we leaving a gap in information? And we like to consider, we're not so big-headed that we think we're that important, but we're kind of a newscast of record. Like, we want to cover the big stories of the day, and there are so many of them. So I get why people feel overwhelmed, and we feel that too. I mean, we are news consumers too, and we're people with families and kids, and and I know it can be overwhelming, but our job, my job in particular, is to distill all that stuff and to hopefully make complicated stories and stories that are important accessible, and we try to explain why they're important and what difference they might make in people's lives. Yeah.
Definitely think that's the key. And yeah, there's I don't think there's even a such thing as a slow news day anymore, is there?
No, I think you're right. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe we can talk about some of your top stories. Maybe we can go into one that you mentioned at the end there at the beginning, the rise of AI. And I mean, especially
Yeah.
and stuff like that, we're already seeing how it's impacting certain media publications, like the Sports Illustrated thing that I don't know if you saw about a month back, where there's some of the writers were actually just AI figures.
Yeah, that was sad to see, I must say. I mean, I think the rise, first of all, my knowledge about artificial intelligence is about this deep. Well, less if I could make it thinner. So, and I think that's the case for most of us. And that is the case. The frightening thing is that is the case for people across the board, including in government, in the places where, in theory, there should be regulators and there should be rules and laws in place to contain and put guardrails in and all of that. So I think the scariest thing about AI, and even the people who have developed it say they don't know what it's capable of. And so, this idea that at some point we might reach what's called the singularity, this global brain of machines that will be somehow self-aware and superhuman and, capable of designing better computers and better robots faster than humans can. So, when you hear people like Elon Musk and Larry Page and, now, of course, Sam Altman talk about this stuff and the disputes that have opened up, including in OpenAI, the company, you think, if those guys are worried about it, and they know far more than we know about the possibilities, I don't want to like be a doomsday or something, and I'm not that kind of person, but I just think there's a lot that's going to unfold in the next 2-3 years in the space of artificial intelligence that we better brace ourselves for.
Yeah, I don't think we're even ready for it. You
Yeah.
mentioned also the sort of geopolitical stuff going on. That's not really something that we talk about here a lot at our publication, but I would love to hear sort of maybe, yeah, you mentioned China and Russia and the US, what the state of that is at this point. And maybe for you as a journalist, what you're hoping that the public takes from that story and maybe how it impacts us as Canadians in some way.
Yeah, well, I guess the thing that I think is most important is to recognize the value of democracy and the value of the freedoms and the systems of government we have in place in Canada, and not undervalue that, and don't do the Canada is broken routine, because you only have to look at other places in the world where people don't have freedom of expression, don't have the right to vote, who are put in jail because of what they believe and what they've said, what they've written, who are killed because they're investigative journalists, who all of that stuff. So that is happening in China, that is happening in Russia. There is more and more control by the government in India over, it's moving further and further to the right. So those are the things I mean that I think we should, and Iran is another example where people don't have basic rights. So I think it's important as a Canadian newscast to keep kind of telling those stories. So if you think we have problems here, be careful what you wish for, because if you want some very strong person in charge of your country who has very firm ideas about the way the world should be, that's called a dictator. So like we could, and you then you better just listen and do what you're told. And that's not the kind of world I want to live in. And so what I worry about is that in journalism these days, there's so many declining budgets, ours included, everybody, all the American, the more better funded news organizations have had so many cuts, they're not covering foreign news the way they used to. So we're not getting those stories. We don't have the same foreign bureaus. We don't have the same insights into the rest of the world. And I think we all suffer from that. My little motto that I have sitting here on my desk is, it's a bit cheesy, but I wrote it out myself, but I don't know who said it, but it's the more you know, the less you fear.
Yeah.
And that's basically my rule of life. So try to learn more, not just about your own little world, but the wider world.
Yeah. That's brilliant advice. What were, the other stories that you had in mind for your top of 2023? We've kind of well, let's speak for myself. It seems like we sort of forgotten that this was the worst wildfire season in history in Canada. It was terrible, right? And the not just the destruction and the difficulties that presented for people who lost their homes and were evacuated, and all of that trauma that goes with that. But the cost to the rest of us, right, of trying to suppress those fires, of even if you're not being affected by it, you're going to pay for it. And I think it's a most expensive firefighting season we've ever had too. That all has to come from somewhere, and that's going to be coming from us. So not just in Canada again, but around the world, right? The terrible wildfires, the one in Maui, Lahaina, it's just brutal. Yeah. So that is another, story of 2023 that's not over. Yeah, I spoke to actually a family of three, a mom, dad, and a young baby they had 2 kids, and just the story of how they had to escape this fire, not knowing what would happen to their home. And I think those smaller stories sort of get lost in the picture of these larger stories we see of like the scenes of the fires and stuff like that. But there's thousands of people that have been displaced by these fires, that have had their lives impacted by these fires, that I think sometimes we forget about those people.
Yeah, and I think also there, but for the grace of God, right? So it's those people last month or last year, but it could be us next month, next year, right? Because the wildfire season it's hitting everywhere.
I wonder if based on that story, obviously a lot of scientists and climate experts are connecting the wildfires to obviously this topic of climate change that I personally believe as a journalist we've not yet looked at as seriously, or maybe it's just the public response hasn't been as serious as it maybe needs to be, considering what's at stake with the reality of climate change. I wonder if you have any thoughts on that from the perspective of a national journalist.
I mean, yeah, I do. I have my own personal feelings about that. And, you know, if I had my way, and I don't, I think I would try to lead with climate issues every day, or at least have them in the newscast every day, because I think it is the challenge for our times. That, and frankly, the rise of AI right now, those two are the biggest. So, and most of us, and I include myself in this, are not scientists. I don't come from that background, and so my understanding of climate science is, again, very limited. So I think our challenge as journalists is trying to take that information and explain it, right, in a way that's accessible to people who are busy in their lives, who don't have time to go deep into these subjects. And we can always do better at that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's 4 stories that we've covered now. Is there one that we haven't yet that
Well,
maybe
I was trying to think of something fun. Like, is there something fun? Because
a dreadful year?
I know, and I long for, we do in our newscast, and I do in my personal life, like everybody, to laugh and have fun and enjoy life, right? And so trying hard, and I guess, it's funny, before I woke up this morning and saw what Time has done and who they've made Person of the Year, I was thinking Taylor Swift. Like, she is a phenomenon, right? And she, not just for her music, and which appeals to people across the board. I have a son who's 19 years old, and he showed me his Spotify top playlist for 2023 and who he listened to the most. And it was Taylor Swift.
Okay.
And he was shocked because he thought, I don't really like her that much. And then the next was 21 Savage, and then Drake, right? So, like, I think a lot of people love her music and who she is because of who she is. She's also an amazing business person, right? And is a disruptor of the music industry. So for those reasons, I would say she's pretty phenomenal.
She's also apparently she's been able to influence people on the political spectrum in the US, apparently, with the voter turnout and stuff like that.
Yeah, she worked really hard in the last presidential election to get young people to register to vote. Yeah, and I know she's kind of alluded to the fact that she feels she should use her voice and her presence to try to do more to get people to vote, to take charge of their own destiny, right? Which is great. Yeah.
Maybe to leave off this conversation then, based on some of the stories that we talked about, what do you expect to be the top stories of the new year? I mean, I assume AI again.
Do you know? Because if you know, you could send me a memo and I could.
No, I mean, some of the things you've alluded to, obviously, I'm sure we're still going to have wildfire stories and stories related to climate change, AI again.
Yeah.
More geopolitical turmoil and all that.
Well, and we haven't even mentioned Ukraine. So, which, interestingly, I was thinking, so Taylor Swift is Time Person of the Year this year. Last year, it was Volodymyr Zelensky. Like, he was considered a hero. Right now, we struggle to get that story onto the news agenda, not because we don't think it's important, but because it feels like it's been overridden by so many other things. And so I really worry about the future of Ukraine and the people there, and Russia's intentions. So I think that will continue to play out in 2024 for sure. Otherwise, yeah, I think all the drama, the stuff going on between these tech titans, right? And how that will play out, Elon Musk and Sam Altman and Zuckerberg, and whatever happened to the cage fight. Like, is that happening?
I hope so.
So I think that whole space and where that goes will be a big story in 2024. Yeah.